Hi, good morning, everybody. You're all very welcome to the session this morning. I think we're just going to wait a minute or two for more people to arrive.
Morning. Morning.
While we're waiting, I might just share some house rules for this morning. We'll be recording today's session, so if you don't want to be on camera, you're very welcome to turn your camera off. And we would ask that unless you're asking a question, you keep your microphone muted during the session. If you want to ask a question at any point, feel free to raise your hand or use the meeting Q&A. And then if you're having any technical issues, please feel free to ask any questions in the chat as well.
So good morning. I see that there is no many people in the room today. It is now 12 o'clock. Maybe we wait for a couple of minutes. I have like quick questions in Mentimeter just to know where, to know audience each other a bit better. Because it's not many people in the room, will be easier just to know each other much better. So I think that maybe we'll start with the questions and meanwhile people can join.
Yeah, I think that's great. And then we'll get started after that then.
So this is the Mentimeter first question, asking which country are you joining from today? Should be quite straightforward, that you can answer from your laptop or your mobile phone if you are not in front of a computer. Good. Ireland and Scotland are Sarah and Gareth. People from Spain. In the register list, we have many people from Spain, so I guess that Spain will be the winner today. We have 5 responses and 8 people in the room. So I'll move on in the following question. Asking what sector do you represent? So you have several answers there: university or research and technology organizations, education and training, company, startup or entrepreneurs, NGOs or civil society organizations, administrations or agency and funding organizations, or other. Okay, thank you for your answers. Good. We have people from non-governmental organizations or civil society organizations. And the last one is, in which sea basin are you developing your activity? The options are the Arctic Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, the Baltic Sea, the Black Sea, the Danube, Europe's outmost regions, North Sea or Mediterranean Sea. So people from the North Sea, from Vanos, 2 from the Atlantic, and 9 people in the room. I see familiar names in there, so thank you for coming today, to joining us today. 3 people from the Atlantic Ocean. We have more answers in the sector, people from universities, 1 from company and 1 non-governmental. And Spain, Scotland, and Ireland as the countries. So it's 12:05, so we start with an introduction to the... Oh, Germany, welcome. I give you an overview on the stakeholder engagement webinar series itself. and then Sarah will introduce our speaker today. Oops. So, my name is Susana Baston. I work at the CETMAR, the Technological Center of the Sea, placed in northwest of Spain, in Galicia. And our speaker today, like Sarah will introduce later on, is Gareth Davies, that will talk about the ups and downs of delivering a sustainable blue economy ecosystem focused on the Orkney experience. And is with me, Sarah Sarsby. So, this is the third webinar of the series, the summer series. And I assume that most of you was already in the previous series. So I guess that most of you are familiar already with the Horizon Europe missions that were held in the 2022. And those are 5 missions named Climate, Cancer, Smart Cities, Soil, and the Ocean and Waters. And the aim of them are providing concrete solutions to some of the greatest challenges for society. And they have ambitious goals to be delivered concrete results in 2030. So that requires quite a big effort from society as well. So in terms of the mission Restore Our Ocean and Waters, there are 3 main objectives, which are protect and restore marine and freshwater ecosystems and biodiversity, prevent and eliminate pollution of our oceans, seas, and waters, and make the sustainable economy blue carbon neutral and circular. But there are also 2 enablers, which are cross-cutting actions, which are the digital ocean and water knowledge system and the public mobilization and engagement. So the webinar today will put together the sustainable blue economy and the public mobilization and engagement. And this second enabler is the one that brings us all together here today. The main aim of the PREP4BLUE is a Horizon Europe project and will last till next year in 2025. And the main objective is to support the research and innovation goal of the mission to facilitate its successful implementation. The idea is to provide tools, guidelines, and methodologies to those other projects with a more local focus. The European Commission named 5 mission lighthouses, 4 mission lighthouses based on the sea basins. So the first one is the Atlantic and Arctic. There is another one in the Baltic and in the North Sea, the Danube and the Black Sea, and in the Mediterranean Sea. And for each of those lighthouses, there will be is linked with a specific objective of the mission. So, as Sarah mentioned before, these webinar, stakeholder engagement webinars are based in a previous one about citizen engagement. This series is available through the PREP4BLUE website. So I encourage you to go there and have a look because there is many different topics and very interesting ones. We have also some results from the project already, such as this beneath the surface report. Also, there is an ecosystem database called WebLinks, and that is related. You can find there information about the stakeholders and engagement methods. So I encourage you to register and have a look at that. Related with the stakeholder engagement results in the project, there are some deliverables as well. So go to the website and have a look. Within PREP4BLUE, we identify the main groups of stakeholders and interest related to ocean knowledge based on the triple helix model. So there are bilateral interactions to support an ocean knowledge-based economic development, and the three main groups are the governance, the knowledge ecosystem, and the socioeconomical ecosystems. The governance main interest is to develop policies and manage funding. The knowledge ecosystem main interest is gaining data and sharing that information through training. And the socioeconomical ecosystem interest is to solve their needs through these ocean knowledge solutions. So doing a zoom into those three main ecosystems, we can differentiate for each of those groups into other groups. So the governance is divided in decision makers and the funding organizations. And for decision makers, we understand policymakers, marine protected areas managers, standardizations bodies, among others. And funding organizations includes think tanks in marine science and other funding organizations. Within the knowledge ecosystem, we can differentiate between the knowledge owners and the knowledge providers. The knowledge owners are the universities and the research and technology organizations, and the knowledge provider schools and vocational and educational training centers, media, and ocean literacy networks. Some of them, like universities, for example, are at the same time knowledge owners and knowledge providers, but we classify here based on the main activity. And in the socioeconomical ecosystem, we can differentiate between the business and industry, including companies, industrial cluster, business developers, entrepreneurs, and the citizens and civil society organizations, which include community-based organizations or non-governmental organizations. And we put here these ellipses or just to make clear that is needed more interaction between all of those stakeholders in order to make the mission Ocean and Waters a success. Here we have the different types of engagement. I am sure that you are familiar with most of them. The difference between them are here shown with the arrows and the hats in the boxes below each of the types. So when you inform, you are just giving information to general public. When you consult, the aim is obtaining stakeholders' feedback. Those are like the easiest or more common ones, and then we'll go to the most elaborate types of engagement that are involve and collaborate and empower. So when we go to the involvement of collaboration, partners get involved in diverse activities, designing and implementing solutions. And in the empower level, we are talking about doing policies. I am sure that most of you are familiar with newsletters, with meetings, but maybe not many of you are familiar with the shared concept, which refers to doing policies through dialogue with different stakeholders. So maybe you are asking yourself why you should be interested in getting involved with the mission Ocean and Waters. So if you are interested in the mission Ocean and Waters and just want it to be informed, you just follow the mission and Oceans in the social media. If you want your opinion to be considered, then you will participate in interviews and surveys and so on. If you want to contribute to achieve the challenging goals defined by 2020, then you will get involved in different activities, in different projects, and just a few of you will be involved in a charrette on an advisory board. So that's the introduction from my side. Just let you know that this is the third and last webinar of the series, the summer series. But as Schwarzenegger phrase, don't worry, because I'll be back, is planned to have another series in October 2024. So save the dates in your diary. There will be announced in September the titles and the speakers, but will be on Wednesday. Oh no, I make a mistake here. Will be on Wednesday, the 2nd, the 16th, and the 30th. So I give the floor now to our speaker today, that will be much more have a lot of lovely and interesting information.
Thank you very much, Susanna. And it was great to get that overview and to just set the scene of PREP4BLUE and Mission Ocean as well for everybody here. I am going to very shortly, I'm going to hand over to our speaker, Gareth Davies. And he's going to talk to us about the ups and downs of delivering a sustainable blue economy ecosystem. And his talk today is going to be really based on his experience in Orkney, where he's based. Dr. Gareth Davies is an environmental consultant. He's been doing this for over 30 years. He founded his company Aquatera in 2000. And since then, he's been involved in the development of marine renewables in Scotland and internationally as well. So he has a lot of experience to share with us today. Gareth, I think I will hand over to you. And as for everyone in attendance, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. There's not many of us here today, so we can hopefully get some good discussion going. So feel free to jump in and ask questions as you go. So Gareth, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah and Susanna, and really delighted to be here today, and particularly being able to share a platform with Susanna, who's a long-term friend and colleague from Orkney, and indeed I see Andrew's in there as well, another long-term colleague from Orkney. So great to see you both on the seminar today. So what I was wanting to do, was talk about the experience that I've had, and I think reflects maybe a wider experience in Orkney, and how the ups and downs of that have shaped the blue economy and some of the issues around stakeholder engagement. And perhaps one of the first questions to ask ourselves is, in the context of the blue economy, what is Orkney? What is an island? What is an archipelago? And very clearly, it's the islands that make up the archipelago, but also equally clearly, if we're talking about the blue economy, we also need to think about its waters. And if you look at the map in the middle, it shows that based on the law of the sea and the proximity of other island groups and other mainland Scotland areas, the red area reflects the area, the waters, if you like, that could be claimed by Orkney as its own. And obviously that's much bigger and wider than the landmass of the islands themselves. But the context of Orkney goes beyond the physical and into the relationships that we have as well. And on the right-hand side there, you can see under the influences and connections, and indeed, the fact that Susanna has lived here for 8 years previously is an example of that. We have a diversity of connections that link Orkney and its waters with other parts of Europe and indeed other parts of the world. So as we think about what is the blue economy in Orkney, but also in other places, it's maybe worthwhile thinking about that. What are the boundaries and limits of that ambition? And in the context of what then happens within Orkney and its waters, Orkney is many things to many people. It's a landscape and a seascape. It's a place where people live. It's a place where things have taken place in the past and in the future, and will take place in the future. And one of the illustrations I've put in here is a map from the 2nd century AD, and it was a Roman map. And what it shows is the Orkney Islands in some detail off the north of Britain. And what that says to me is that the Orkney Islands were of strategic importance as far back as the 2nd century. And in fact, I'll take you back a bit further than that later on. And then in the present day, obviously we have a few more accurate maps. But interestingly, perhaps our knowledge of the sea and the underwater realm is not developed as much as the land-based realm. And one of the other things that Orkney is it's not just a place, it's a way of doing things, it's a community. And one of the things that we've looked at is why and how Orkney does things. And this phrase has developed, which we call the Orkney Way, which is just 3 phrases: stepping forward together. So it's about collectivism and collaboration, creating the future. So it's not waiting for somebody else to tell us what the future is. It's actually creating from within what our future is going to be. But very importantly, learning from the past. And there's an incredibly rich past of successes and failures in and around Orkney. And so that Orkney Way is stepping forward together, creating the future, learning from the past. Now, in the context of policy around our seas, that Orkney Way also has to then fit in with the national way and priorities. And Orkney and Scotland have adopted a phrase, if you like, around our seas, which is for them to be clean, healthy, productive, safe, and biologically diverse. And the pictures there, all from around the islands, reflect that those priorities. Now, we're fortunate that all of these can be delivered at the same time. And one of the challenges of the blue economy is obviously to do that in a balanced way. And one of the ways that we can best ensure that is to have good engagement with the local communities. And that's going to be a theme that I return to in the presentation. So what is the breadth of the blue economy? And this is a really interesting topic, I think, because there's been many diagrams and lists that have been produced to reflect what at one stage or another people think is the blue economy. But I don't think any of the other lists that we've had and seen have shown the diversity that's reflected on here. And what the picture also tells the story of is that the blue economy is a huge mixture of things. It's around boats and activities that relate to boats. It's about aquaculture. It's about energy from oil and gas or from renewables. It's about tourism and recreation and arts and the creative side of things. But it's also about our coastlines and our coastal communities and how they interact with the seas. And of course, many of our blue economy activities rely on a vibrant and healthy ecosystem. So the fish, birds.
I can't hear you. Got it?
Gareth, I think your sound is cut out.
All right, is that better now?
Oh, that's perfect
Yeah.
now. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'll just go back a sentence. So it's just to say that the diversity of elements that make up the ocean realm, including the ecology, as well as the social and the economic parts, are all crucial parts of that. So why might that blue economy be important? And this starts to then look at some of the interactions that you're going to have with stakeholders. So in a way, the clue's in the name. It's an economic proposition. So the economy, the money that people and communities have been able to make from the sea, it's been an important part of our economy. It is an important part, and it's likely to be in the future. It's also been incredibly important culturally. Many aspects of the community history, and the nature of culture in coastal communities is coming from the sea. Perhaps because of the boundless nature of the sea, you can basically get in a boat and sail anywhere in the world. It's important for relationships. And in certain communities and at certain times, it has a direct influence on resilience, sometimes because of the threat that the sea can pose to those communities, but sometimes in terms of the resources and the opportunities that it can give as well. It's also important in terms of linking sectors together, because unlike the land, you can't fence off the sea particularly well, and therefore you're reliant on others to a greater extent. And one of the more important things that's happening at the present time is that, like our atmospheric climate, the ocean climate is rapidly changing. And that is most latterly being seen with the very stark and alarming rise in sea temperatures in the last 18 months. And alongside that comes a potential for acidification of waters as the carbon dioxide levels increase as well. And then there's some human sides to it in terms of stewardship. So, the blue economy is important because you need to have a way of managing these activities, which, as we said earlier on, are perhaps very closely reliant or interact with each other, but they also have a close relationship with the communities that are in those areas as well. And underpinning all of that then is a desire for the blue economy to be sustainable, and the desire for it to be a part of the success of a community or a region or a country that lies at the heart of the overall success of that geographical entity. So one of the interesting things about having a conversation about the blue economy is that it's not something that is reported in the statistics. So we hear about inflation, we hear about GDP in our nations, we hear about the number of jobs and unemployment, but nobody ever comes on the news and says, oh, by the way, our blue economy just shrank by 10% or it just increased by 20%. And so what this slide does is it seeks to look at the contribution that island economies can make. And it was interesting, in the top left-hand corner, you can see some statistics there from Scotland. And Scotland was basically making the case that with 8.4% of the UK population, it was making a much bigger contribution across many areas of the blue economy. And what I did is I applied that same principle to Orkney. So not surprisingly, with a population of only 22,000, our kind of per capita or the number of people that we have in the UK population and the Scotland's population is even smaller than that from Scotland. But what you then see is that the percentage contribution that Orkney can make is in many cases 2 or 3 orders of magnitude bigger than its population. And what this shows is that for islands and for coastal communities, the economic and the value contribution that comes from our seas and our blue economy is likely to be much more important than the actual population belies. So effectively, it means that islands and coastal communities are likely to be more important than other parts of our society. So what's interesting then is to ask the question, well, is that importance reflected in the regulatory frameworks, in the policy frameworks, and in the focus for funding and support that comes through our national government systems? And it's probably true to say that that isn't really reflected in many cases. So one of the tasks I wanted to do was almost think back in terms of what are the key milestones that have happened in a place like Orkney in terms of its blue economy. And so I'm sorry this is a bit of an unimaginative list, but I couldn't think of a better way of presenting it. But basically, as of today, and I was just down at a meeting in Glasgow yesterday where we were looking at how Scapa Flow, which is in the middle of Orkney, could be used to house new port infrastructure to support the growing offshore wind industry. And if we look back at the last 10 years, one of the big changes that we've seen in Orkney's blue economy is around cruise liner traffic. We have nearly 200 cruise liners a year now coming into Orkney. And similarly, over the last 20 years, we've seen a big increase in wave and tidal energy, and Orkney has become famous for testing these devices. But also at the same time, there was something called ship-to-ship transfer of oil, and this was particularly before the war with Ukraine and before COVID. There was Russian oil coming from the Arctic oil fields, coming in ice class tankers to Scapa Flow to be then transferred into global ocean going vessels. That trade's now stopped. Going back a bit further, into the 90s and the 2000s, crab and lobster fishing was a big success in Orkney, and previous to that, pelagic fishing. And as we go back in time, you can see that oil and aquaculture flourished in the 70s and 90s. Seine netting, a particular type of fishing, was very popular and successful in the 70s and 80s. Salvage work on wartime battleships has had a heyday. Military activity itself was important during the World Wars, as was the herring fishing industry. And then going back further, the whaling in the Hudson Bay activity was really important in the 1700s and 1800s. And what's really fascinating, I think, is from a community heritage point of view, the blue economy and its significance actually can reach right back to the early traders and people that came to Orkney perhaps 10,000 years ago. And we can still see signs of how they came to Orkney in terms of the boats, and how they lived in terms of using the sea for some of their food. And so that concept, if you remember back to the Orkney way about learning from the past, we've got an incredibly rich past to learn from, which all has the sea as part of its significant roots, if you like. And so from a community point of view, the richness of the relationship you have with the sea, it comes from the past as well as the present. So one of the things I wanted to touch on is obviously the people side of it. And again, if you ask most communities how many people work on the sea or connected with the sea, that won't be a statistic that they have available to them. And indeed, in Orkney, it's a very difficult number to come up with. But we think that there's over 100 local businesses that are involved one way or other directly with work in the maritime environment. We also have 3 universities in Orkney. All of them have activities related to the sea. And so you can see there that in a place like Orkney with just 22,000 people, maybe 100 businesses connected to the blue economy, it's a really important part of what we are and how we do it. And so, perhaps 1,000 jobs in Orkney are related to the sea and relating to the blue economy associated with that. So one of the other things I wanted to touch on briefly was the relationship with data and the availability of data. And part of the reason that Aquatera is based in Orkney is that living in an island situation surrounded by the seas is an incredibly inspirational and stimulating environment for having new ideas. And one of the things that we've developed is a spatial mapping tool called RadMap, which basically allows GIS data to be brought into a spatial model to look at the relationships that might take place between different blue economy activities. And the significance of having a model like that is it can stimulate and be useful for stimulating a discussion between stakeholders within a community about what their activity is, why it's undertaken, where it is, what their important factors are, and how that might interact with other sea users. So that ability to have a conversation backed by a map of spatial information which represents the interests of particular stakeholders is a tool that we found incredibly useful to resolving conflict and showing and creating mutual understanding. Another thing that we are really interested in at the moment is the concept of creating digital twins. Now, very often those are applied to particular technologies. So you might have a digital twin of a building or a digital twin of a boat. But what we're looking at here is a digital twin of a spatial area. So effectively creating an artificial environment within which scenarios can be mapped and explored, and the consequences of particular actions can be looked at. And this can also be a repository for baseline and monitoring data, which is going to be increasingly needed and is increasingly gathered. And there's something called cyber physical infrastructure, which is basically a digital fingerprint for the world that then allows other machines and digital technologies to interact and navigate through that environment. And so as we become more and more digital in how we do things, it's going to be necessary for each part of our geography, both on the land, but particularly on the sea, to have cyber physical infrastructure available for digital technologies to navigate through those areas. And the third theme I was just going to touch on is around infrastructure. And I mentioned that Orkney is on the cusp of hosting a major expansion in UK offshore wind. And for the UK, it looks like offshore wind is going to be our power source of choice for going for net zero. We probably need about 150 gigawatts of that over the next 20 years. And that's going to be around £200 billion of expenditure of investment into our blue economy, effectively. And that money will get spent on turbines, it will be spent on support bases, it'll be spent on aircraft and vessels, it'll be spent on power conversion equipment, transmission equipment, excuse me, and also in helping local energy users transform and transition from carbon full energy sources to decarbonized energy sources. So it's mindful, I think, to think that our blue economy has always changed, but the amount of change that's likely to take place in the next few years or 10, 20 years because of climate change is going to be all that much greater. And the way that that might manifest itself in particular is in new port and harbour infrastructure. And this slide shows three areas that are being considered for that in Orkney. The left-hand one is a new coastal port facility that the local authority is proposing. In the middle here, we have a different concept of a floating port in the middle of Scapa Flow, and that's something that might be quite transferable to other geographies as well. And then the third concept is the expansion of an existing oil port to extend into this area of land and to create new harbour infrastructure. So the point being there that as we make more use of the blue economy, we probably need to have better and greater port infrastructure to allow that to happen. And then the final example, before I go to some of the conclusions, is thinking about maybe how climate change is going to change things as well in terms of oceanic travel. So for the last 100 years or more, basically shipping from the Far East, from Asia, has come either around South Africa and then after the Suez Canal was built through the Suez Canal. But over the next 10 years, it's likely that the ice in the Arctic is going to melt to the point that a route from the Pacific to the Atlantic is going to open up to the west or the east of Greenland. At the moment, given the geopolitics that's happening, it's more likely to come through Canada than it is through Russian waters. But this is going to transform the relationship that Europe has with Asia, because this route is about a third of the distance of going around the more southerly route, and is therefore cheaper and likely to use to a much greater degree. So what does all this mean in terms of the change and the churn and in terms of local engagement? So the first question I had is, why is local engagement critical? And the experience in Orkney and elsewhere around the world is, well, first of all, it's because it's the right thing to do. In the world that we live in, you can't really go ahead and do things without engaging with the communities that are hosting the activity. I think another point is that coastal communities are often effectively Europe's First Nations communities. These are communities that have been in existence with continuous lines of settlement for thousands of years. And those communities have held on to traditions and rights that were passed down from generation to generation. And so many of the First Nations issues that we see in Canada and the US and Australia and other parts of the world can be applied to our coastal and particularly our remoter island communities in Europe. Another reason why local engagement is critical is to help establish the right baseline. It's a well-known fact that we know less about our seas than our space and the land. And so if we're going to find out those key facts, we need to engage with local people because they have the understanding of what is going on, why it's gone on, and therefore also can help understand why things and how things can be best achieved. And through that engagement, you also have the best chance of getting local support and backing for appropriate activities and for building the local expertise into what you do. And that reliance on localism and local expertise can lead to cost optimization. It can certainly maximize value, and it can also lead to significant local investment. Over the last 20 years in Orkney, for example, there's been about £1 billion of investment in renewables and energy transition, and about a third of that, £300 million, has come from local people, local businesses, and the local authority. So how can that engagement be achieved? And what I've done here is, rather than look at the specific methods, I've looked at some of the underlying principles that might be important. So one of them is identifying appropriate ownership rights and assignment and an allocation of those rights through meaningful roles and responsibilities. And that's often then translated into a level of control and authority over how things are done. And in the civic structures that we work in at the moment, sometimes these can be maintained at a national level, but finding a way for them to cascade down locally is really important. And by doing that and creating that localism in our structures for managing the blue economy, we can better appreciate local desires and aspirations, and we can start building local capacity rather than having to import capacity from other areas. And all of that is underpinned by basically learning from the lived experience and sharing learning of good and bad experiences from people on the ground in these areas. So the process that then underpins that is to make it that the participation needs to be early and proactive and inclusive, and increasingly it needs to be just, it needs to be enshrined with equality. And we find that the best way of doing that is to align those with the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, because they provide a really strong and uniform foundation which cuts across all communities. And importantly, there needs to be a feedback loop so that where we see success and people extract positive value out of our blue economy, we see some of that recycled back into our communities through local benefit and local content. There are challenges associated with making the blue economy work at a local level. And part of that is that the status quo too often has been to centralize that and have it controlled from national government or national agencies rather than regional or local agencies. And getting those agencies themselves, but also developers, to let go, if you like, and and help empower the local communities is a real challenge. But at the same time, we do have a job to do to motivate our local communities that have maybe been on the wrong end of a lot of knockbacks over decades. And so to give people the confidence that this is for real is really important. And once you've achieved that and you've given the space for the community to come and get involved and you've motivated them, then we need to give them the mandate to deliver and to maintain standards for good and progressive governance, and ensure basically that people are always aspiring to be as good as they can be and to achieve the maximum benefit. And that can be a foundation for success. So what success would look like then, finally, is basically a thriving maritime and island communities, buoyant blue economies, safeguarded ecosystems, and diverse and successful maritime enterprises. That's kind of all the good that can come out of it. And having everyone sharing in success and everyone helping to deal with the problems and overcome the challenges. But that needs to be led by local communities reflecting their values. And the common, as I've talked through, the common building blocks for that are a strong and agreed baseline and an insightful and imaginative spatial plan, strong but adaptable controls, appropriate standards, ongoing monitoring and reporting activities, and finally, continual dialogue and investigation of key issues and opportunities. So hopefully that's a little insight into Orkney and some ideas about how successful management of the blue economy can take place by engaging wholeheartedly with local communities. Thank you.
That is great, Gareth. Thank you very much. It was so interesting. I knew very little about Orkney coming into this, I will admit, but it was great to get that overview and just to learn more about it. I have a few questions for you, and I'm sure Susanna does as well, but we might give our audience here an opportunity. If anyone wants to jump in with any questions, please feel free to do so. No, I might get the ball rolling if that's okay. I feel like Orkney is a very sort of unique place, and it's quite all the examples you're putting forward are they're very self-contained. You're on this archipelago, and there's the islands. And what lessons would you have that, let's say, might extrapolate to larger communities, or what is it as easy as just transplanting the lessons learned, or do we have to adapt them?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that we kind of say when we come to these questions. The first is that Orkney is no utopia. Like we can talk endlessly about the things that have gone well, but we could also talk pretty endlessly about the things that haven't gone well. So the idea of just copying what's happened, I don't think is appropriate. And that relates to my second point, is that I don't actually think that anywhere in the world is a direct duplicate or replicate of anywhere else. So each coastal community and each set of islands are unique to the conditions and the circumstances associated with them. But that, by the same token, doesn't mean that none of it's applicable. So if you accept that everywhere is different, but perhaps there are some good lessons that can be taken, and sometimes there'll be the things that have worked for Orkney, for example, but it may be something that in an Orcadian context didn't work, but it would be very applicable for another place. So it's important to, I think, just have a degree of awareness about all the things that have happened, and then almost take them forward and say, well, look, what might work well for us given our circumstances. And so all of that kind of insight is going to come from drilling down a bit into the detail of what's going on rather than being too superficial about it. But I mean, there are huge lessons to be learned from anywhere in the world by other places, and it's only through these kind of initiatives that we start to share them and exchange them.
Yeah, that's great. Susanna?
I have a question about the methods. I mean, you mentioned this radar map that you find very successful for engaging with the stakeholders. My question is if this is an app for a mobile phone and you got to a meeting and said, well, open your phone and you will see the different layers. It works like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would absolutely love it if it was at that stage. But it's basically it's a philosophy and it's a way of handling data as much as it is an application. And underneath all of it, what RadMap is based upon is treating the world as a series of grid squares, and each of those grid squares has a set of data applicable to it. So in the context of, say, seabed, if you take an area of seabed, it'll be at a certain water depth, it'll have a certain sediment characteristic, it'll have a certain gradient, the currents and the wave action associated with it will be specific. The wildlife and the sea life that's in that area of sea will be specific to it, but also the activities that happen. Is it in a shipping lane? Is there a cable running through it? Is there interest to people fishing that area sometimes? And what we find is that each grid square has its own characteristics. So a bit like the communities, that in reality, even though there's millions and millions of grid squares, none of them are direct duplicates of the one next to them because there's always something that's different. And what RadMap allows you to do is to then basically create that database and then start to analyze, well, if I'm going to go and do something here, how is that going to affect that stack of characteristics or not? So that method and that approach is universal. We have developed or applied it on a global basis as well as on a regional basis. But it's more of a desktop app rather than a mobile phone app at the moment, if you like. But it could be developed to that. It's not technically impossible or even inappropriate to think of it being an app. It's just we haven't had the investment in the tool yet to make it like that.
It's just because my second question was about the port facilities that you mentioned. I always mention because I was there, that when the extension in Stromness, the port of the extension in Stromness was done, I participated in a citizen meeting where the government was explaining the different approaches and asking people what preference they have and why was that and so on. And that was very impressive from my personal experience. I also think that this is a size thing. I mean, you can do that in Orkney because it's a small place. It's more difficult to get these kind of methods in other parts. But I'm wondering if you are planning to do something similar to that with those facility extensions that you mentioned. Are you asking the Orkney community which option they would like the best?
Yeah, so it maybe didn't come fully across, but there's 3 different developers involved in those 3 schemes. So there's a council, an oil company, and us as a local enterprise. So the 3 entities have their own, at the moment, it's not a coordinated program. So each of them are following their own pathway and their own priorities. I think it's definitely true that best practice in any development process is to engage with the public, and particularly the informed public, as early as possible, and to get their input into the option evaluation process. Because if you go with and say, look, this is our preferred approach, people know that by then it's almost too late. So you have to go in before then, in our opinion. Now, whether you can do that easily or harder in bigger communities, we have done similar work in other larger communities, even cityscapes. And I mean, there's 2 things. One is that the level of participation isn't proportionate to the population. So we might get 100 people in a room in Stromness to discuss a pier. If we were in Santander or somewhere like that in Spain, we may not get more than 100 people in the room to discuss the port development in Santander. So where you are doesn't necessarily dictate hugely the level of participation. I think, and the methods, we've seen it work in urban as well as in rural locations. But the key thing is for the developer to be confident and brave enough to go early to the stakeholders and say, this is what we want to do at high level. These are our objectives. These are the ways we're thinking of doing it. We'd like to get your feedback about whether these have pros and cons associated with them.
Do you have any other questions, Sarah? Because I have many.
No, I'll hold off. I don't know if anyone in the group would like to unmute and ask any questions. Feel free to do so. Otherwise, Susanna, I'll let you lead away.
No one in the room? Okay.
Cecilia?
Hello, thank you so much for all the insights. I'm Cecilia Manago. I'm with Aaron Innovation, and I would like to ask about the inclusiveness which you highlighted. If you could share an experience where that was especially important, as a best practice to maybe, and a lesson learned to apply it also in other projects.
Yeah, there's different levels at which inclusiveness can happen. So sometimes if we're working for a developer, we may only have like one meeting or something like that we have as an opportunity to engage with people. So what we try and do then is make sure we advertise it as widely as possible and try and target groups that we want to bring to it. But when we organize the meeting, we don't organize it as you're sitting in rows and you have to put your hand up to ask a question type meeting. What we try and do is create a circulation space where people can come and maybe sit and speak in smaller numbers, often with a facilitator, or they can move around a display, an exhibition, and ask questions as they go. And what we find is that those two formats help us spot people that are maybe a bit reticent about engaging, and you can kind of go and pull out of them a bit more of their comments because they're not having to expose themselves in public. So I think there is if you like, a skill and an art to that in terms of getting engagement from people in a setting. And it's really important to create the meeting space that allows that to happen. And again, in different cultures and different places, it would be worthwhile speaking to local people and saying, what kind of meeting space works, for you. And obviously the first person that speaks might see themselves as a community spokesperson, but they're not necessarily that in other people's eyes. So you have to be careful not to take the first response and just assume that everybody buys into that, because there might be a number of voices in a community.
And that's very interesting. Susanna, do you have more questions? You're muted. Did see you waiting to jump in.
Yes, sorry, just the last one. Gareth, I love the slide where with the numbers. I like numbers. So I think I understand that it's tricky, and it's tricky just to categorize with numbers what's blue economy. I miss, for example, or maybe it was there and I think I wasn't aware. Tourism, for example, or do you have? What's your?
So these numbers are. There's two things with numbers. Obviously, they have to be accurate to be meaningful, but they don't all come at the same with the same ease, if you like. The databases that we have are not all the same. So I have to put my hand up and confess I took the numbers that were more easily to hand than ones that were more difficult to find. So in each place, different people report different numbers. And so tourists, like, we know how many cruise liner passengers we have, but we don't necessarily know how many total tourists we have, because the cruise liner tourists are measured every time they come on and off the cruise liner, but the general tourism is not so regulated. So the statistics are biased towards what was available to illustrate the point, if you like.
It's just because, well, for people that is not in the sector, the basic question is, what's blue economy? How do you understand what's blue economy? So my concern is about over tourism, that is a trending topic right now, I miss archaeology. In Orkney, many sectors that you can link to the blue economy, and that's what's represented in that slide. That blue economy is just marine renewable energy or offshore winds, depending of the area that we are talking. One sector could be on top of the others, but in Orkney, it's like there are many of them working together, making the blue economy a success, not just one over the others. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And in a sense, that's why companies like Aquatera and ICIT as a college and everybody is here in Orkney, because it's a melting pot of different activities that happen beside each other and, as you say, on top of one another sometimes. But it's not on top necessarily in conflict. It can be on top, but with synergies. And so the art of managing the blue economy is to say, where can you get a win-win rather than a lose-lose relationship? And very often that doesn't come through imposing something from the outside. It comes from the local people sitting down and working out what the best accommodation is. So is it like you go in the morning and I go in the afternoon, or I go on a Wednesday and you go on a Friday, or I go in the springtime and you go in the autumn? Whatever it is, work with the local people to find out what the fix is. And if there isn't a fix, then you might have to start horse trading. Do I cut my bit back to allow you to do your stuff? But that's always going to be better discussed locally rather than imposed nationally.
Thank you very much, Gareth, for your answers, for your talk today. I'm very pleased of having you here. And Sarah, any other things to finalize the meeting?
Well, just to say thank you very much, Gareth. It was incredibly interesting. I've learned a lot, and I have a lot to think about now for my own work as well going forward. So it's fantastic. So thank you for your time, and to you, Susanna, for all the organisation. This is the last of the kind of the summer sessions of these webinars. I put a link in the chat where you can access the recordings, and then the recording from today will be up very shortly, all going well. But that is great, just to say thank you to both of our speakers and to everyone who attended today, and hopefully we'll see you at future sessions as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
I think it was nice. Sarah, are you here? No, because there is a satisfaction survey that she didn't share with the audience. Never mind, I'll do it afterwards.
That's good. And is this AI? This is just the transcript, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just make things easier. It's just you got the transcript, and then it's easier to do a report and whatever.
Yeah. So no, that was great question, Susanna. So as ever, it's like in half an hour is not a long time to get through quite a lot of different topics, but yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, I wanted to introduce you myself with nice pictures of Orkney, and it was like, well, not too, it's too bucolic to.
Yeah. Exactly,
It's like, well, I'm partial here, so.
Yeah. No, I know.
Hope you recover soon. Sorry that you have called.
I'm better, but it's funny. Like since COVID, I think I've had about 10 different infections, which it doesn't feel as though it is COVID, but it's just a very repetitive infection that can't seem to, it takes 2 or 3 weeks to get rid of. It's horrible. So
Wow.
But
everything okay in Orkney?
Yeah, it's interestingly, like the Stromness Hotel, which made, like it got taken over by somebody who didn't believe in alcohol, and so that became a really big problem for the town because it wasn't a place you could go and relax and chill out, and so and after COVID, there was a lot of difficulty getting staff for hotels and restaurants. So the Ferry Inn and the Royal, they only one of them stays open in the winter, and it's different ones in different winters, and they don't serve any food. So it almost becomes like you know, you have on the Wild West where you have the tumbleweed going through the street. It feels a bit like that in the wintertime. But it's really funny how things work. But there was an accident in the Stromness Hotel where the person was uninjured actually, but they fell down the lift shaft in the hotel because the lift was not in order, and they opened the door and they just stepped into it.
Oh my goodness.
But they survived, and it was like an 82-year-old person, and apparently they weren't injured. And I just don't understand.
I
Anyhow,
can't believe.
what that's meant is that the hotel has got closed down, which is
Yeah.
fantastic, because now they'll have all the inspectors over them and saying, well, you're not going to open it. And so I really, really hope that the people that own it decide to sell it. And we're thinking about trying to get it as a community asset. So we'll see.
And I'm worried about these wind turbines in Scapa Flow. I can't believe it. It's really, I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, they won't be installed in Scapa Flow. It's just Scapa Flow will be the base for the assembly, and then they'll go out to sea.
Okay, that's
But
better.
yeah, but the you know, the road down from Thurso to Inverness,
Yeah.
and you have that view. So all of that now is full of offshore wind turbines. They're about 10 miles offshore, so it's not right in your face, but there's a lot of them. So yeah, out to the west and east, it'll be on the distant horizon that you'll see them. But you know, it's in a way, you know, it's not perfect, but it also means that hopefully the UK is getting clean fuel.
Yep.
And if we play our cards right, maybe we can get some good jobs out of it as well. So yeah, so we'll see.
People goes back. I mean, I don't know, Andrew is away, is Jennifer away?
Yeah.
But I guess
Well,
that
yeah, she's obviously she's still working with us from the Isle of Man, which is brilliant. And so yeah, some go and disappear, some kind of go and stay, as it were. But yeah, and like Ian Johnston is still here, and Ali Skeen, and Ian Hutchison's still working here, Karen Inkster, Diane. Sinclair, yeah. So there's Duncan, of course, on the data side. So there's quite a few of the old hands still here.
But you get always new faces, and Simon Wellman is back. So
Yeah, we have a really nice Spanish lady, Claudia. She's from Madrid, so she's doing our comms and social media stuff at the moment. So
in Aquatera.
yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah. But she's quite interested in the science and policy side, so she's hoping to. Well, she's already doing contributed to some consultancy, and then we have a lady Maria, who's Portuguese, so she's based in Lisbon, and then Natalia and is still in the Canary Islands, obviously, and still as lively as ever, and she's got a colleague, Xavier, who's used to work at Plocan, so he's come to work. So that's good fun. Yeah.
So you go to Canary Islands quite often?
I haven't been there ever yet. Still, not in my life. I've been to Madeira, but not to the Canary Islands. Yeah. So
Lisbon is a very nice place as well, or south.
Yeah. No, I need to go. It's ridiculous, but with COVID and then just everything that was going on.
Well, if you come to Galicia, please give a ring.
Yeah, no, I will do. I will. And of course, Manuel, you know, my friend in Santiago, so he's got married now and he's got a child as well. Like he was like 50 or whatever. Yeah. So it's such a change for him.
I met him this year because of the project. So
yeah,
it's nice. He asked me, how's people in Orkney? I said, oh, I don't know.
Yeah, no, he's just such a character. He's yeah. And are you still staying across the Ria from Vigo, or you're in Vigo itself?
No, across the area.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
live
yeah.
in BPEO.
Yeah. I still think floating solar is a really good technology for the rears, to put that on the mussel rafts and have them as co-generate, like food generation and energy generation. So I need to try and find a way of getting into that. Then there'd be a good excuse to come and stay
To
for a
come
couple.
here, of course.
Yeah.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you very much, Gareth. I know that Karen is not in the office today. I have to pass. I'm sorry about the money and these kind of things.
Oh no! Listen, Susanna. It's not. The main thing is it's great to see you and
Yeah, I know. I know.
Yeah. So I hope the what I was able to say was good enough for you. And
It is.
yeah, if you see any opportunities in the future for joint work, we'd be delighted to work with you and Setmar again. And if you think there's a proposal, you think, oh, I wonder if we could do that together. We're really happy to collaborate.
Great.
And likewise, we'll think about things. Jen obviously leads on quite a lot of our blue economy stuff. So yeah, she's delighted that we just, it's another little way of collaborating. So
Great. Thank you very much, Gareth.
okay, have a good lunchtime.
You too. Cheers.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye.